You had me at Cello, Cello. You had me at Cello. You had me at Cello. Oh, you had me at Cello.
Good evening, everybody. It's 5 o'clock on a Friday. Rolls around again every week. And it's almost time to practice, but first, another episode of Cello Chat. And this week with me is another current student at UW-Whitewater, Gabe Lewis. How are you doing, Gabe?
Doing fine. Yourself?
I'm doing really well. We are both near the end of finals week. How are your finals going?
They're coming to a close. We're scraping through on the last few of them here, but we'll get it done.
Nice. I can see even you're in the process of transitioning into summer, which is really exciting.
We're getting out of here, so it's a bit of a mess right now, but that's irrelevant.
And it's particularly exciting for you, isn't it? Because you have an overseas trip and an internship coming up. But maybe I'm getting the cart before the horse. Because first, how about if you introduce yourself, tell a bit about yourself and how you were drawn initially to cello and tuba, and then we'll segue from there into these summer plans.
So starting off, Professor Whitcomb had said, my name is Gabriel Lewis. I'm studying physics here at UW-Whitewater. I'm transferring to UW in Madison this next semester to pick up some engineering. So the plan is to do a 3-2 program. I'm going to have 2 degrees by the end of 5 years. So I'll have a physics major, engineering major, math minor, music minor. It sounds like a lot. It is. It's been a real trip so far, but more to come. But as far as my picking up of music, it's starting playing cello. We all had our elementary school day where they brought all the instruments out. We had to try them, and with cello, it's as simple as can be. I liked the sound. I didn't like the high pitch squealiness. I didn't like the bass was too much for me to carry. I was a scrawny little runt, so it was the nice medium happy. Nice sounding instrument. Although I don't suppose a 4th grader playing it would sound very good. With tuba, I actually started on trombone, and the story for that is actually both stories for my brass instruments are kind of funny. So with playing trombone in 4th grade, I played as one of the kids in the Music Man at Fort Atkinson High School. I was the kid who had the joke book in his back pocket and got his wrist slapped. And I was adamant about getting the trombone when we came out as the band. I was going to get it, so I knew I wanted to play it. And then switching to tuba happened in 7th grade. And the story for it is dumb. I saw a cartoon of somebody playing a tuba and I thought it was funny. So I said, that sounds like fun. There's not a really grandiose tale to that. Continuing on from I wanted to do DCI for a time, but money and time concerns just didn't allow it. And I kind of settled on cello, and here we are.
All right. And you have managed to successfully juggle both, keeping music in your life and having a major that's very time-consuming and demanding, which I think is probably the case for a fair number of our viewers. I mean, when I think about it over the years, I can't think of a single year when we haven't had someone, whether in taking lessons in the cello studio, but in the cello ensemble or in one of the orchestras or something, who wasn't passionate about music, but majored in one of the sciences or in business or in something else. So do you have any words of wisdom or advice to people who want to go into something else vocationally when they get to college, but still love music and wonder if they can juggle both?
Yeah. So if you really love what you're doing, taking on a music minor is always something that is a possibility. Your time management is going to be the hardest thing because a music minor is about one of the more time-consuming minors you can pick up. And with all of the work that goes into playing an instrument, it's a lot to add to your plate. So when you're tackling this, it's I think back to my band director in high school. He'd always tell me is not that you want to eat an elephant, but you have to eat it one piece at a time. You just have to go day by day and sort of plan things out carefully and just manage your time and be aware of things. Obviously, you're going to make mistakes. There are going to be times where you procrastinate and you burn out hard, but you'll get through it. And that's the important thing. And as long as you have people that you can lean on every now and again, it's a good thing. And make sure that you have those resources. Most campuses, I know here at Whitewater, we have plenty of resources to help you with time management. If you need some help, it's all there. So it's plenty doable.
Excellent, outstanding. Okay, now the trip and the internship.
Yeah, so briefly talk about those a little bit. So the trip is a travel study course led by two of the professors here at UW-Whitewater. One is the physics mentor I've been working for almost 3 years now. Professor Oscar Seaton, he's with the physics department, and then Professor Juk Bhattacharya, she's in the geology department, and they are leading a trip over to Iceland to do some little bit of research, and it's sort of a way to just kind of dip your toes into some light research and then get a cultural experience and then come back to the States. It's a 1-week trip. It's fairly short, but it's bound to be interesting. This is my first time leaving the States. Following that, actually, it's my summer becomes very busy. I get back the 29th. The 30th, I have to pack. The 31st, I get to leave for Nebraska because I have a internship working at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln on one of their REUs. It's a research internship, and I go there for the summer, and I do whatever they tell me to. They haven't given me much in the way of details yet, but from what I have been able to glean from some of the professor's papers, she's been working with sort of ferromagnetic films. So in essence, it's a thin film that responds to a magnetic field, and they're testing that with respect to nanoelectronics and all sorts of that sort of thing. She's also worked on neutron detectors, but based on what's on the site right now, I'm not sure that I'll be working on those as much as working on the ferromagnetic films.
That sounds interesting. Okay, now two more questions. I know you have some of the FAQ questions for me. One of the questions I have to ask you, given your major being in physics, there's kind of two kinds of musicians. There are the ones who don't necessarily want to deal with the quantitative aspects of the relationship between music and number, whether it's the math or the physics of it. And then there are people who are utterly fascinated by it. So as a physics major, when you're practicing, when you're playing music or just thinking about music, are there certain things that you just either would bring to the attention of people your age, or just that you find interesting?
The way that sound travels, obviously it travels this wave, and our strings vibrate in a wave pattern. So as we're looking at very basic wave mechanics, we can analyze a string using that same method. So if we take the halfway harmonic, for example, and we lightly touch there, that's a nodal point. By placing our finger there, we force the string to vibrate at double the normal frequency. And that sort of physics is, I believe it's Pythagoras who had the ratios for that. Mm-hmm. And those are all over the place. Anytime you look at basic music and physics, those are there. I don't have it here because I got rid of my bookshelf, but at home I have a book because we have a free books cart over in the physics lobby of old books. One is a physics for musicians, and it's a book just all about sorts of different types of things, looking at the overtones and some of the sound analysis of what's going on in all of that. Because if you think about it, every wave is adding up differently. So if you look at it on an actual graph, it'll look like a bunch of bumpy lines, mostly moving up and down. That's because the waves are adding up and down, constructing and deconstructing on one another. So when you hear wave beating, so say you're trying to tune a string, this is where it's helped me the most. You can hear that and you can tune it in and you go, aha, I know this. And you dial it in and it's right there. Once you become aware of that phenomenon and its, implications physically, it makes a lot more sense. Because if you tell someone to listen for beating, it's going to take a while to get it. But if you tell them, well, they're doing this, listen for then they're going to get it. And then they'll understand why it's happening. And I think that's a big part of what really getting physics into music is.
Very nice. Very nice. One more question. Music, as with, I think, other arts and probably, I would imagine, most, if not all, sports, has a strong component of a kind of a mental game. You know, I mean, maybe even more so than most because of the fear of public speaking, public performing sort of thing. But even just motivating oneself to practice, which is one of the running themes of this series, the mind game cannot be neglected. And I am very impressed with how far you have come in your time at Whitewater in your attitude towards practicing and towards the mistakes, like you already mentioned that inevitably happen. And so there too, I just wonder, do you have some words of advice about that mindset that is so critical to success in so many fields, including music?
It really comes down to how judgmental you are of yourself. And it also, that links to how judgmental you are of others. You kind of just have to shut that part of your brain off and tell it to shut up and go away, because it's gonna sit there and be a perfectionist, and it's going to bog you down, and it's going to make everything impossible. You know, if you have this little, I always call it a gremlin sitting in the back of your brain, picking at the strings, making it impossible to focus, you're never going to get anything done. You know, you have to sort of reach an equilibrium with everything in your head and try and find a way to kind of get that Zen cello yoga, as you might call it, kind of reach that Zen zone, if you will, and try and find your way into something where it's almost meditative to practice. And you have to basically ignore your brain when you're practicing, because it might sound like cats dying, but it'll get there.
Yes.
It's Edison didn't get right on the first try. Why should you? So
Very
it
nice.
takes time. It's not a overnight process. Rome wasn't built in a day. If it's not better, it's not the end. Keep going.
That's great. Great words of wisdom for the end of a week, for a Friday. And if people need to hear something like that on a Monday morning, they can go to the archives and listen to it again there. That's awesome. So now you have some of we're whittling our way gradually through the most common of the frequently asked questions from the website.
Yeah. So one of the ones I have over here is, why can't I play things in the same way as I do in a performance that I do in the practice room?
Yes, yeah. Doesn't that happen to just about all of us? I mean, even if you get close, it often feels like, and you can take that compliment after a performance and they say, oh, that was very beautiful. And you're tempted to say, oh, you should have heard me earlier today. I nailed it. And they don't want to hear that. They really don't. But and it really is, it is a big question, but in a nutshell, I think the biggest thing is that there are a lot of times when, if we're not careful, when we're practicing in the practice room, our brain is just kind of just very, very bland mode. Oh, here I am with my instrument, do, not particularly registering high on the attentive or anxious, or here we've got to get this just so kind of scale. And then you find yourself on stage with the lights and the audience, and now you really want to play your heart out, and you haven't practiced that, and so it doesn't necessarily go the way you want. Certain things, just either with intonation or just the tension level or what have you. So part of it is, when you are coming up, when you're in kind of the late middle or late stages of practicing a piece, part of the game is to get yourself in the mindset of what it's going to be like on stage. Of course, it's not going to be identical to when there are actually people out there and the lights on you, et cetera, and it's real. But that doesn't mean that there's not ground to be won by just taking some time and putting oneself in that mindset. Of course, recordings are really great this way too, because just that little flashing red light just makes it a little bit more real. In some cases, even if you find out, okay, I don't want to listen to that recording, I'm going to do it again, and you don't re-listen to it. The fact that it was being recorded makes you not just quite so easily be able to go, oh, I know what I did there, I won't make that mistake again. So that's part of it. And then another big part of it, I think, is the distinction between when we are practicing, are we trying to get it to where it's always exactly the same way and it's just this perfect structure, or does it have some resilience to it? Because when push comes to shove and you're on stage, a door might slam or a person cough or just something else makes your attention go, or you moved a shift wrong, and you don't want one mistake to create other mistakes. And if you have practiced in a way that allows for a certain amount of resilience, somebody on a balance beam and they look like they almost fell off the balance beam, but if they didn't, then that doesn't count against them. And it's amazing, it's truly amazing if you think about it, how often, if you keep a straight face and you keep going through a very minor mistake, nobody even knows, nobody even cares, nobody remembers it, And what's kind of, in some ways, maybe even more impressive is that once you develop that mindset, the minor mistakes that happen get more and more minor. Your recovery time becomes just super fast. So it's not about creating some perfect structure necessarily. It's about getting a vision for how you would like it to go and realizing that the wherewithal of, like a good driver who is always aware and thinking ahead, is a part that you also have to build into your attitude when you're practicing, or it's not going to translate on stage. One final thing, I know you've got other questions too, but I think there are times when, if we're not careful, our conscious brain, when we're on stage, really wants to micromanage everything that we've trained our muscles to do, as opposed to thinking higher thoughts. Oh, how do I want to, what's the big meaning of it all, of this piece of music, and give the conscious brain larger concepts to focus on. And then the muscle memory that we've done our homework on, that we've trained so carefully, is kind of just more nearly able to do its thing and find the flow. And then when we're on stage, what we're directing our brain towards is conveying a meaning. And it's amazing how much less, that has a certain ballast to it on stage, to where even if the result at a given moment of a performance was not identical to what you were thinking of in the practice room, it still will have had a life of its own and an integrity of its own. And you don't have to tell anybody afterwards, oh, I was actually envisioning a slightly different interpretation. No. You were feeling it, you were with it, the audience was with it in the moment, and it was a slightly different thing from what you practiced. So be it, if that makes sense. What else do you have?
So another one I've got here. I've been told that I have good ears, but whenever I'm trying to play a pitch, a certain pitch that is, I always seem to get it quite off, and I'm not sure as to why that might be. For me, that would be an F sharp on the A string.
It is funny because I do also teach some aural skills classes at Whitewater. having degrees in theory as well. And there is a common assumption, not just among non-musicians, that if you have good ears, why, then you're done in a way. You play a variable pitch instrument, it's no problem. You have good ears. It's going to take care of the pitch. But it's the same sort of thing in a way. I think of it like when you go on vacation and then you come back to your house and you first step in, you go, there's a slight smell here. How come I only notice it when I come back from vacation, whatever it is? And the brain just kind of trains it out. And it can be the same sort of thing with a melody. It tends to happen with all of the melodic context in that passage going on all together as part of the baggage. So basically, anything that you can do to separate any given pitch from that musical context is going to be a great way to draw your attention to whether or not you become pitch blind to it. So that could be just playing the notes, playing a passage backwards, or playing it in a different octave if you suspect that a particular note might be a little bit off. There's, of course, recording yourself is a great way too, because when we're just listening and we're not also playing, we tend to be able to notice some things that we didn't necessarily notice when we were playing. Because sometimes, let's face it, that what we hear is the recording in our head that plays very loudly. And that's what we want to believe that we played. And then you're just listening to a recording and you're going, oh my gosh, I really am flat on that note, or you might learn other things, or I really rushed through that passage. That wasn't what was going on in your head at the time. Other things, playing on the piano, even if you're somebody who grants yourself total license to play just intonation or to bend a pitch a little bit, that does not mean that it isn't also useful to match equal temperament. And just that objectivity of playing a tune on the piano just really makes you hear, oh yeah, that's those relationships among those pitches. And then preferably, I think, go play it on the piano and then sing that, and then play it on the instrument. Finally, there are times that it can be useful to take a pencil and mark a downward arrow on a note head that you were sharp on, or an upward arrow, a very small one, on one that you were flat on. And I mean, of course, there are going to be times that you do get to see that out of your peripheral vision, but you over-exaggerate it maybe. And a note that was a little bit flat, now you're too sharp on it. But that still serves the purpose of dislodging the habit. You know what I mean? You're still not going to be just like pitch blind to that note. Now you're aware of it and you can kind of Goldilocks it and go, okay, this is too low, this is too high. This is exactly where I'm hearing it in my mind's eye and I want to place it. So that should probably be enough for people with that issue to be able to work on.
Well, there might be a tangent we could go on here with this. Speaking on habits, one thing that's, I think I could speak for a lot of people, habits is something that it takes a long time to shake those elementary school violin teacher trying to teach cello habits, and you get a lot of bad things. What's your approach to dealing with habits?
I think the best thing to do is to try to develop an awareness such that when you start to realize, if I repeat this, I'm starting to repeat a bad habit. The more I head down this particular direction, the longer it's going to take to come back. So that you have to have this radar awareness of every single thing that you're doing, ideally, so that if you start doing something that is indeed a bad habit, you go, wait, why am I doing this with my shoulder, or whatever the case is. So awareness is a big factor. I think another thing I would say is that with enough kind of persistence at breaking habits, you can get kind of a more supple approach to playing an instrument that makes it kind of gradually easier to replace less good habits with better habits. So it isn't, even if just the first few times that you try to replace a bad habit seems like, oh my gosh, that was the toughest thing I've ever done in my life. It gets easier over time to just suddenly go, oh, wait, that's a better fingering than mine. And boom, you just adopt it in an instant. Not that the previous fingering was necessarily a bad habit, but you get more and more flexible if part of what you are practicing is the ability to be a flexible player. But yeah, it's definitely the best thing really is to avoid letting the habit become ensconced in the first place. Sorry.
All right. So last question I have over here is about practicing. So if we've practiced a piece and we get it up to snuff and then we have it, what do we do with it afterwards once we're done?
This is not at all an uncommon problem. People who maybe they learned a piece and then they performed it and then they get told, oh, you could do that for a concerto competition or a solo contest or something like that. And they're like, well, but I already learned it. What am I going to do with it now? And in some cases, it's just a matter of when we go from the early stages of practicing where you're adding the fingerings and bowings and learning the notes and whatnot. And then the middle stages where you're trying to kind of overcome whatever technical challenges there are and figure out what your musical interpretation is and apply that. But then in the later stages, as we start approaching the performance, and part of it is always going to be a run through from start to finish to make sure that you don't have to stop at a particular spot. But then that like what you said, when you're talking about habits, that becomes now a habit, is just to start at the beginning and end at the end and go, well, that was pretty good. And it feels like, what am I going to do? Tomorrow I'm going to get out my instrument again and do the same thing, just start at the beginning and go to the end. And well, in a way, I think that's one of the things that can relate to this theme of motivation in the first place. Sometimes people burn out a little bit when they realize, well, I have these pieces that I know, and I can get out my instrument and I can run any of them through from start to finish. And I can realize that none of them are absolutely perfect, but I kind of have the same problem and they don't necessarily know where to go from there. So I think two things immediately come to mind. One of them is finding musical things to do with a piece once you've learned it. And there, the best source of inspiration is the zillions of interpretations that are available for free instantaneously at the click of a button online. You look up at different interpretations and you click and you go, no, I don't, this one is there, but oh, I like this one. Oh, I never thought of doing that before. So things like that, or a master class on the piece, or studying the form of the piece. There are ways to look for different interpretations. And then from a technical standpoint, actually, this is a very good question on the cusp of summer, because for many of us, we have more concerts in the fall and the spring than we do in the summer. And we don't necessarily have the time, the liberty during the fall or the spring to, let's say, re-envision or just reinvent the way that we do vibrato or dynamics or a particular coordination or a bowing style or whatever it is. But you can find some of those spots that in the piece that could have been better, and you identify them and you think, all right, this summer I'm going to make that spot sound better. And one way I like to do that, definitely one of the charms of music is that we want to hear the piece from beginning to end. And it can be very hard for some people to make themselves stop and dissect a piece and just work on the relevant spot that needs improving. But you can also take whatever that concept was, let's say if it was a particular rhythm or bowing pattern or something, and apply it when you're practicing your scales or arpeggios or other things that you do in your warm-up routine. And then by the time you get back to the repertoire that you've been working on, it's great. You feel like, wow, I can't believe I had an issue here before at all, because now it's just going so well and I feel like a fancy virtuoso. All right. Well, thank you, Gabe. Hopefully that's some food for thought for the weekend and maybe for the summer as a whole. And I sure wish you the best of luck in not only your physics studies, but I think your these internships and the travels can lead in interesting directions. And I know for a fact that you're always going to keep the musical component as a part of your life as well. And you'll find a nice balance and blend among those things.
Naturally.
And best of luck to the viewer for practicing this weekend and follow-ups thereafter. But we don't have to go too long until next Friday arrives, and we'll see you again and see what that particular Cello Chat edition will bring to bear as well. So happy practicing in the meantime, everybody. Take care.